welcome to a very sunny edition of America's News Headquarters from Ocean City, Maryland. I'm Elizabeth Pran. Happy Memorial Day. Hi, Leland. Hey,
Looks like you're having fun out there. A lot of news back here in Washington. I'm Leland Vittert. We'll get right to it. As we speak, President Donald Trump on Air Force One flying back home, arrives about 10 o'clock tonight after wrapping up his first overseas trip. The president made a stop to see some of our troops in Italy before taking off. John Roberts traveling with the president and has the only backdrop that is better than Liz's today. Hey, John.
And it's only because of the mountains and the food. I'll give you the food as well. Leland, good afternoon to you. The president left the Sigonella Naval Air Station about an hour ago, boarding Air Force One, headed west for the United States in Washington, D.C., but not before he stopped and paid tribute to the sailors and naval airmen and civilians who are at what's called the hub of the Med here at Sigonella Naval Air Station in Sicily. They really take care of a large region where there was a lot of problems. So the president was very thankful the work that the men and women of the military put in to keep this area of the Mediterranean safe. He wrapped up his 9-day visit with that with the speech there and really kind of doing a wrap-up as well of the overall trip, saying that one of the things that he's most happy about was the fact that he got a new commitment from Arab nations, Muslim nations around the world, the Israelis, and our NATO partners and EU partners to rein in terrorism and to try to fight the extremist ideology that fuels it. Here's what the president said at Sigonella just a short time ago.
I am now more hopeful than ever in the possibility that nations of many faiths and from many religions and from many regions all over can join together in a common cause.
But as the president heads back to the United States, he is flying into the face of a new political storm after reports that his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, in a meeting in December with the Russian ambassador to the United States, Sergei Kislyak, allegedly asked Kislyak if they could establish some sort of secure communications line between the Trump transition and Moscow. Ostensibly, that line may have been to allow the incoming National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, to have secure communications with Russian generals to talk about the way forward with Syria and in the greater cooperation in terms of the fight against ISIS. At a press conference just before leaving the G7 here in Taormina, H.R. McMaster, the National Security Advisor, and Gary Cohn, the president's chief economy advisor, refused to take any questions about Jared Kushner. At one point, H.R. McMaster basically saying, "Don't you have anything better to talk about?" Listen here.
I'm happy to talk about anything about the trip, anything about what the president's goals were on the trip, what progress we made, and then what we're going to focus on to follow through in the areas of countering terrorism, countering terrorist financing, countering radical Islamist ideologies, and how we're forming new partnerships in the region, how we're developing a coherent response to Iran's disruptive behavior in the region, what we're working on with our allies and partners in connection with the threat from North Korea. I mean, does anybody care about any of that stuff?
So H.R. McMaster pretty much with that statement ended all questions about Jared Kushner and Russia. The president also making headlines, tweeting out that he will make a final decision on what to do about the Paris Climate Accord next week. So the big question, Leland, is will he keep the United States in the Paris Climate Accord of 2015, or will he, as many people expected he would, withdraw from that? We'll see. He had a lot of discussions with European leaders. We're told that his thinking about it has, quote, evolved, but we don't know to what degree. Leland?
Well, he'll have a lot of time to think on the flight west, and hopefully, John, you'll have some time to enjoy a little food in Italy before you hop on the plane home. Great work this trip. Thank you. Elizabeth, with a little bit more from the Jersey Shore, the Maryland Shore. You never know where you are, Liz.
That's true. I travel often. So let's break this all down. There's a lot to get through. Joining me now with more is Reuters White House correspondent Aisha Roscoe. Aisha, thank you for joining us. I want to start with the challenges that the president has upon his return with your reporting. What do you think is his biggest challenge as he comes back?
Well, his biggest challenge is going to be dealing with all of these stories that are coming out about, possible Russia collusion and things of that nature. I mean, obviously, the investigations are ongoing and no findings have been made, but it is casting a shadow over the president's agenda.
Okay, it's absolutely casting a shadow. He needs to get everybody focused in the White House when he returns. Any reports of a shakeup, any reports of tactics when he gets back. You know, when we look at his, for example, his Twitter, he often communicates on Twitter. We don't see anything domestically. He's certainly been tweeting, not as much as normal, but he's been talking about things like the Paris Accord and him returning back to the States. Nothing domestically about taxes or health care. So how does he really rally the troops when he returns?
Well, I think Reuters is reporting that there's talk of setting up this war room where you would bring in maybe some old campaign hands, bring them in, have them focus on responding to these stories, responding to everything that's coming out about the Russia investigation, and then allow others in the White House to focus on those domestic issues that you talked about, to focus on tax reform, to focus on health care. So they're trying to basically give the White House officials some breathing room so that they can focus on those issues that matter probably most to the American people, and then have others focus on the Russia investigation.
At the same time, lawmakers come back to the Hill shortly after the president does, but a lot of people are focusing on the fact, you know, we heard from former CIA Director John Brennan. People are saying that testimony, we didn't necessarily learn anything new. So how do lawmakers get back to what they are elected to do? And can the president help also say, listen, we all need to get back to work?
Well, I think that what the president can do is try to focus, not to be distracted by all these stories that are coming out each day, and focus really on, okay, this is what we want to do when it comes to taxes. This is what we want to do with healthcare, and really kind of drive those messages home. He uses his Twitter, you know, often to get around the news media. So he could try to set the agenda that way. It seems like the White House, though, has often been on defense because things are kind of hitting them at all angles. So I think the president could try to set the agenda that way. The Congress, you know, they're saying that, look, we are trying to get things done. We think that we're really going to be able to make progress, but they're going to have to try to get on one accord. They're going to have to try to get some unity on what they actually want to do.
Yeah, especially when we just heard, you know, the findings of the CBO report. I mean, there's a lot of work to be done. So Aisha, thank you so much for joining us. Certainly no shortage of topics. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
A lot of work and no shortage of political infighting either. Let's bring in our fair and balanced panel to take a look. Al Mater, who served on the Hillary Clinton campaign national finance team, and Brad Blakeman, former top advisor to President George W. Bush. Brad, back in the days when President Bush used to travel, this was your favorite moment. He'd set up the whole trip. The president was on his way home. He comes back, as President Trump pointed out, with a number of deliverables. A lot of wins here. Does that translate into domestic political capital?
Sure does. It creates an opportunity now for him to pivot. We're going to see this week on Wednesday, he will go to Des Moines, Iowa, and he'll have a rally. And he'll lay out, I'm sure, his domestic agenda, which is going to be a challenge to Congress to legislate and to get things done before the end of the year. So I think the president has had a tremendous trip internationally. Now he has to turn that into a successful domestic agenda back here in Washington. But I think he comes back with the wind at his back now. I think he has the opportunity now also to put the investigations where they belong, and that's behind closed doors. We have a special counsel. There is no need for the White House to be on this every day, feeding stories that are uncorroborated by unnamed sources and by leakers who are so far the only criminals in this.
So, Al, does this give the president a unique sort of moment now to reset the narrative, come back, and perhaps try to get movement on something? Because so far, when it comes to domestic policy, other than executive actions, not much has happened.
I think it gives him a little bit of an opportunity in the sense that his declining ratings will probably stabilize a bit, and he did deliver some messaging that his base would be very excited about. But the problem for him is he's not on the same page with the Congress. You know, he wants to regulate drug prices, so that's health care. He doesn't like the border adjustability tax. Well, that's Paul Ryan's plan. So he may have some more political capital, but how does he use that to drive things when he can't even agree with the Republican leaders?
What is the difference, Brad, between the cup and the lip here in terms of the broad message appeal that President Trump won on as he was on the campaign stump and very successfally so sort of sold these ideas to the American people? Implementing them, however, seems to be a lot harder said than done for him.
It is for a president. But you have
Do you think he's figuring that out?
Oh, absolutely. But you have to turn rhetoric into action. And the way to do that is do what he did in his successful foreign travels, is hit the road. Deals are made on Pennsylvania Avenue, but they're sold on Main Street. So right now, the president should have thematic weeks where he's going out and speaking on the economy. He's going out and speaking on taxes, on healthcare reform. The success of a president is using the bully pulpit to his advantage and getting outside of Washington and going to those places where he can make a difference and putting pressure on the people who are ultimately going to be voting on this.
I mean, I was just going to say, I mean, here's the problem. When you go abroad, you're dealing with a foreign leader, a head of state. It's easier to make a deal one-on-one. Back here, he's dealing with 535 legislators, about 100 of which are investigating him. So it's a much more difficult arena.
Well, and Brad, sort of to that point, the Democrats have decided that even if it's sort of in the best interest of the country to make a deal, politically it's in their best interest to obstruct everything on the president's agenda. He's a little bit, you know, tied, maybe not two hands behind his back, but certainly one.
But the good news is that we control the House and the Senate and the White House. And the American people...
Right, but Paul Ryan can't control his own caucus.
Look, the fact of the matter is we got the health care bill through the House. Now it's in the Senate. And when they reach the ability to reconcile the two bills, a deal is going to be made. Look, it's not Donald Trump who made these promises. It's everybody who stood for election in 2016. Yeah. And by the way, 2017 has got to be a year for action because 2018 is going to be your reflection.
Well, we're back at the election circuit then. Al, Brad, appreciate your insights as well. Thanks so much. A lot more coming up here all weekend long as the president returns home. Coming up tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz talks about the coverage of the president's first trip and the latest Russia revelations and the role of what Brad was just talking about, leaks. And Chris Wallace talks to Senators Dick Durbin and Bill Cassidy about the White House budget rollout and the future of health care. Both big things. Debt ceiling will probably come up as well. Check your local listings for time and channel. With that, back out to Liz.
That's right. Coming up after the break, Leland, how is law enforcement handling and working hard this weekend to keep beach lovers safe here in Ocean City? We'll talk about it, especially in the wake of the Manchester suicide attack. And as the high season cranks up here at beaches from coast to coast, what's being done to keep human encounters with sharks at a safe minimum? Fred, joining me now, Wicomico County Sheriff Michael Lewis. Thank you so much for joining us. Did I get it right?
Thank you, Liz. You did a wonderful job.
Right? Okay.
Better than most.
All right, I appreciate it. Maybe not perfect, but better than most. In all seriousness, we are on the heels of a very deadly attack. Obviously would be described as a soft target. I'm looking up and down this boardwalk. A lot of families, a lot of people enjoying their time here. But it's your job to protect them. And of course, I know that you're in the county just west of us, but it's your job and many others
Absolutely.
to protect these people. And how do you step up to that task? Because it's new, it's a different threat.
Well, we only do it with partnerships. We've been partnering with the Ocean City Police Department and the Worcester County Sheriff's Office, as well as the Maryland State Police for years to keep Ocean City residents and our visitors safe. And we swell to about 300,000 to 350,000 people any summer day. This is a huge holiday weekend, kickoff holiday weekend, being Memorial Day. And I got to tell you, we love to see this boardwalk packed like this, but like you, we have concerns, obviously. But not only do we have uniformed members of law enforcement from our different agencies that have partnered to keep everyone safe, we have covert operators that are working up and down this boardwalk all day and all night long to ensure that we are on top of anything. And we work very closely with our Joint Terrorism Task Force, and we're on top of everything. We're very confident that those who are visiting Ocean City, Maryland this weekend are going to have an incredible weekend. Right. We want them to have a great weekend. But like everyone else, we are concerned about the potential of anything happening.
Well, it's your job to think of the potential. The potential, unfortunately, is morbid, and the potential, unfortunately, has been a reality.
It has.
So it's your job to think of every scenario. It's not just your job. There's law enforcement agencies across the nation right now. It's Memorial Day everywhere, obviously. So how have you adapted that? How do you think of every scenario? Because you have to be right 100%.
We certainly do, and we receive frequent intel reports and frequently have conversation with the FBI, and we get a lot from the Department of Homeland Security. So we're well aware of the other threats that are occurring throughout the nation, but we have to stay focused on our mission. Our mission is to ensure the safety of everyone, not only those who live in Ocean City, but those who visit this entire area. For those who come down to Ocean City, Maryland, any given day, they must travel through Wicomico County to get here. My county being the county immediately west of River City today. And it is a concern. It's a concern that we deal with every single day out here on patrol. And through the grace of God, hope and pray that the holiday weekend for all Americans is a safe weekend for Memorial Day.
Not a time for you to be politically correct, I assume.
No, it's not. No, it's not. We can't be politically correct. That's what's destroyed our country, political correctness. I've said that many, many times. We have to focus on the issues and head them head on. We can't be politically correct.
Does that come from leadership? Do you feel like you have that leadership?
We certainly have it under President Trump, that's for sure.
All right, Sheriff, thank you so much. Thank you for keeping us safe.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Joining us. Happy Memorial Day.
Yes, ma'am. You too.
Leland?
Coming up, President Trump says his budget proposal will increase growth and cut a lot of big government funding. But some lawmakers, even Republicans, say they aren't thrilled with Mr. Trump's plan. We're going to have why they're concerned coming up after the break.
I'm a graduate of the West Point class of 1966. We suffered more casualties than any other class in the history of West Point. And one of my dear friends and classmates was Mike Snell. I didn't see him after graduation until we were together on Firebase Birch's Garden on the 13th of June, 1969. He came by my foxhole with a can of beer. And about 2 in the morning that night, We were overrun by the North Vietnamese 29th Regiment. A young soldier came running up to me and he said, "Sir, do you know Captain Snell?" I said, "Yes." He says, "Well, I think he's in really bad trouble." We were, in terms of personality, entirely different. But in that one moment on that morning of the 13th of June, 1969, I realized as I held him in my arms that Mike and I shared a bond in both life and death that no one...
All right, let's get straight to President Trump's proposed $4.1 billion budget. It has critics on both sides of the aisle. I want to bring in Steve Bell, former staff director for the Senate Budget Committee. Steve, I want you to break this all down for us. My first and foremost question is a reminder that annual budgets are largely blueprints. They're not bills. We look at President Obama's blueprints. They were largely ignored. So I saw a lot of negative headlines this week. But I think our viewers need to remember that this is a blueprint. Am I right?
You are right. And I think one of the most important things people are forgetting is this. The president laid out three very important strategic alternatives in that budget. Number one, he did attack, as many people have said he should, so-called entitlements. Now, it wasn't the entitlements that a lot of people wanted, but it was a very substantial number of entitlements. So you have entitlement reform. Number two, he has a tax plan incorporated. Some people would say, well, the numbers aren't quite right, but that's a matter of opinion and of calculation. And number three, he said he was going to start to reinvigorate defense. And he did. Now, a lot of people, and I'm one of them, think maybe he should have gone further in defense. But forgetting the details for a second, that's a pretty good strategic outline of what the country needs.
Okay, I want to go back because I didn't want to interrupt you because you laid out 3 bullet points. The first one you said was taking a cut to entitlements. And I assume that you're saying that's when critics say, look, he's going to be taking a knife to domestic programs that we need. That includes science, social welfare programs, research programs. How do you have to pacify people who depend on those programs. So how does how do lawmakers going forward appease those people, but also try to incorporate some of these suggestions from the president?
If you admit that there are overlapping programs, 4 different departments do worker training, if you are willing to admit there's a lot of administrative complications and a lot of agencies don't even talk to each other, even though they do the same thing, then you have to admit, as the General Accountability Officer said, and as even the Congressional Budget Officer said, there is a lot of things that can be changed in this budget in entitlements and in annual funding that will save a lot of money and bring a lot of efficiencies. Now, I'm not saying the president's recommendations are all good, but I'm saying he's on the right track.
Okay, I look at some of these biggest cuts. I look at the Department of State and International Aid that was going to be cut, and I think we have a graphic around 29%. The EPA down 31%. Those sound like really large percentages. Are there places where the president can maybe not cut quite as much? I mean, those sound like double-digit numbers.
Well, they are double-digit. In some cases, it's a reduction in grant programs. In other words, there will not be as many grants given out in some program or some other program. In some cases, they are eliminations. And I do think the president has said, this is what I want. Why don't you all in Congress respond? And let's see if we can, to use a famous phrase, make a deal. As you said, this is a blueprint. This isn't the final word.
Right. I want to bring in, go back to your 3 points. I want to go to point number 2. You talked about a tax plan, a calculation. I assume that's a lot to do with the fact the federal government really wants to push the burden, the cost of Medicaid onto states. First of all, is that ever going to happen? And B, how much of a relief would that be for balancing a budget?
Well, actually, Medicaid, as you know, has a lot of problems. The state-federal split is part of it. And I think Medicaid is going to be an area where there'll be a lot of give and take during these negotiations. But let's remember something about Medicaid. We have 51 million people. That is 1 out of every 7 human beings in this country on Medicaid. We've got to do something better than that. And eventually, somebody is going to pick up the tab, and usually it's insurance companies through hospitals, and basically it's a taxpayer. So you've got to think about, is there a way to provide this and make sure it goes to people who are needy and not people, frankly, who are greedy?
Okay, my last question, and I want to get to it. We don't have a ton of time, but we've had a lot of people critical of the math here, the calculation. Is the growth that experts predict too good to be true?
I think it is. Remember, we boomers, me, not you, we're going out of the workforce now. And if you go back 30 years, we're in our prime working years. And that demographic fact is working against us. And something else, productivity has slowed down. And so as people get older, they are less productive. So I don't think that it's wrong to argue that you can't really get consistent 3% real growth without some dramatic change.
Dramatic is right. Steve Bell, thank you so much for joining us. We always depend on you to break down some of these very complex nuances. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, and I'm jealous that you're out there.
Thank you. Leland?
Aren't we all? And on this Memorial Day, Border Patrol agents say drug smugglers, say that 3 times fast, are getting increasingly bold and creative when it comes to transporting product into the United States. Our William Langenes with more from the border.
On a typical day, a few months ago, you would see 3, 4, 5 rafts full of people coming across. Now, as you can see, there's not very much going on.
But a few miles away, smugglers are busy, not moving people, but drugs. In Texas, smugglers float fully loaded trucks filled with marijuana across the Rio Grande. This one got turned back by the Border Patrol, forcing the driver to ditch it in the river. Co-workers tried to swim the pot back to Mexico. And when we were there, it happened again. So moments ago, this pickup was on the U.S. side filled with marijuana. Border Patrol gave chase. They turned around, dumped it in the Rio Grande. We got about half the marijuana. The other half went back to Mexico on a raft. Most pot is backpacked over the border. By contrast, 81% of hard drugs cross at the ports of entry in cars.
We've seen narcotics come in shaped like carrots, mangoes, lime, watermelon. So they'll take advantage of whatever's there.
Agent's best defense walks on 4 legs, not 2.
Really, it doesn't really matter. They train all anything, marijuana, cocaine, heroin.
Americans get about 95% of their heroin, coke, and methamphetamine from Mexico, hidden in tires, bumpers, and buckets. Here in the Rio Grande Valley, seizures more than doubled from last year.
They need to make their profit somewhere. So now they're trying with narcotics.
William Langenes, Fox News.
All right, when we come back, much more from here in Ocean City, Maryland. As Americans ring in the first weekend of the summer season, the boardwalk here in Ocean City, many are going to be using the tram to get around. We sure did all weekend so far. For one tram driver, the job is simply a dream come true.
I worked for about 45 years in the sales. Goal of myself and my wife was to retire, move to the beach. Mine was to drive the tram, and I'm living my dream.
June 4th, get ready for the next revolution.
I promise you, we are going to shake things up.
Steve Hilton's been on the front lines of Brexit and a champion of the populist movement.
We've got to get power out of the hands of the establishment and the elite who have messed things up for so long and put it in the hands of people.
Now, he's bringing his powerful message straight to you.
People are sick and tired of the fact that whoever they vote for, nothing gets done.
See why voters are finally fed up and how you can join the movement.
This is a time of revolution. And we want to show you what's next.
The Next Revolution with Steve Hilton premieres June 4th, right here on the Fox News Channel.
And in my lifetime, the heroes of World War I, the doughboys, the GIs of World War II, or Korea, or Vietnam, each died for a cause he considered more important than his own life. And how they must have wished, in all the ugliness that war brings, that no other generation of young men to follow would have to undergo that same experience.
Unfortunately, that wish did not come true. Americans in uniform are answering the call once again, fighting the war on terror in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, and of course in harm's way around the globe. Andrew Brennan, an Army helicopter pilot in Afghanistan, says just like the boys of World War II, Vietnam, and Korea, those who have fought deserve a place to honor the sacrifice made by their fellow service members in the war on terror. Andrew, we'll get to the idea of a war on terror memorial in a minute, but I first want to get your thought on this, coming off what President Reagan said. It used to be that GIs went overseas, they fought a war, they came home to peace. Now we are 16 years into the war on terror, and it seems, if anything, to be intensifying.
Sure. The paradigm for war has really shifted over the last 16 years, and it makes it very challenging when you start talking about, how do we adequately pay tribute to the sacrifices that our service members and their families have made over a 16-year conflict that there is no sight, no end in sight for.
I'm always touched. Tomorrow we'll be out at Arlington for Memorial Day, and I'm always touched by the juxtaposition between so many Americans out enjoying the unofficial start to summer and other Americans whose family members have paid the ultimate cost spending that weekend in a cemetery, for lack of a better term. Where's the balance? Where should Americans find the right balance between saying thank you and celebrating the freedoms that people like you fought for?
I mean, obviously, we want everybody to, enjoy the long weekend and things like that. But, taking time to remember the folks that have served and again, the families as well. I mean, that's one thing that I think a lot of times gets over.
Murphy of the 75th Ranger Battalion, who died just this week inside Syria. A vehicle rolled over on him there. He joined a couple of years ago, but he was born in 1995. That meant he was 6 years old when 9/11 happened. Probably barely even remembered it, if remembered where he was that day. Yet he signed up. And now when it comes to building a memorial for him and for others who died in the war on terror, it's a very different challenge than what those who tried to build a World War II memorial and a Vietnam memorial faced.
There are some challenges. They're able to be mitigated, though, and currently we have a bill in the House of Representatives, H.R. 873, and in the Senate, which is Senate Bill 926, that helps fix some of those problems. There was a law written in 1986 called the Commemorative Works Act, and it stipulated that a war memorial could not be built for 10 years until the official end of hostilities of a war or conflict. And again, with that shifting paradigm of war with continuous conflict, we've met the historic burden at this point where we can look back and say that this war has been significant enough in the course of U.S. history to warrant a permanent place on the National Mall. So these two bills authorize building the memorial, and they allow our foundation to move forward in the process of finding a site and location.
All right, we've got the website up on the screen right now. Very quickly, has the White House weighed in? House and Senate currently considering the bill?
The House has 96 or 92 co-sponsors. The Senate has 14, and the White House has not, although we have reached out. So we're hopeful that they will put out a position piece on that here shortly.
We know the president will be at Arlington on Monday. We'll see if he says anything about it. Andrew, thanks for your service, and then continuing to try to honor those who you didn't bring back. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks. Liz, back out to you outside.
All right, with summer just around the corner, one lingering fear in the back of beachgoers' minds are the creatures who call these waters home. Just after the break, we're going to speak to a local shark expert of just how large this threat is. And in fact, it's Captain Mark Sampson shot this video. He'll be up after the break. There's about 250,000 people here this weekend. It's a very, very busy time. As Americans enjoy this beach holiday weekend, of course, that means safety and security teams are also out in force on land, sea, and air, keeping a watchful eye out for sharks, which are becoming an increasing worry at many ocean hotspots, although attacks on humans are still fairly rare. Joining us now, Captain Mark Sampson, author of Modern Sharking, and a local ocean shark and fishing expert. Sir, thank you so much. I know it's a very busy weekend for you. To give our our viewers a visual, there was an article written about you, and I think it was last year, that said basically when you reel in a shark, you're a one-man NASCAR pit crew to tag the shark, learn as much as possible. So what do you do day in and day out, and what have you learned over the past 30 years about these creatures?
So I'm a charter fishing captain who takes people out recreational shark fishing, but we've also folded into our trips some shark research that we're involved with, helping researchers by doing procedures to sharks and some tagging and things like that. So that's where the, I guess, the pit crew thing came to be, because when we get these animals on deck, you know, they're live, and we have certain things we have to do to them in a timely manner. So we have to act quick and get the process done and accurately, and then get the shark overboard in a healthy condition.
So what have you learned about then? I mean, you've been doing this for 30 years. And then also, what's the biggest misconception, you know, for people here that are coming here this weekend?
Well, I mean, the misconceptions have always hovered around sharks. You know, how dangerous they are, how tough they are, how hungry they are, and all that. We're actually, you know, they're just a big dumb fish out there in the sea that's just trying to live.
They may
and do
argue
thing.
that.
Well,
that.
they might. Sharks, like any fish or any resource, need to be treated with respect and handled carefully. Okay, from a fisherman's standpoint, we might look at a shark and say, oh, it's a big, tough shark, and yet through the process of even catch and release, sometimes we can do it wrong, and we turn the shark loose, and he swims away, and he doesn't survive the encounter. So that's a bit of a learning curve there for the fishermen, how to properly handle these animals. So they don't die from their interaction with us.
You talk about doing something wrong, and I want to ask you, because I know last year you had a problem with people fishing right here on the beaches behind us. They were chumming the water and fishing for sharks. Right. That doesn't help the situation.
Well, it's not uncommon for people to fish for sharks from the shoreline and all around the country, all around the world. The problem is, though, sometimes it becomes a spectacle. So when a fisherman, whether he's on a boat or from the shore, he gets a shark in and he's going to release it, he's got to do it right. Now, to drag a shark up out of the water, up onto the dry sand, go through a big photo session and all this, and you know, invite their friends down, come on down, have a look at the shark, and then drag it out and think it's going to survive, that doesn't always work that way. So, yeah, it has to happen quickly and
safety,
properly.
Obviously. What has surprised you the most about these creatures over the past 30 years? I mean, I can't even put a number on how many sharks you've caught.
Yeah, you know what? They never cease to amaze you. As we're preparing for our primary shark season here, you know, the summer season, I spend a lot of time in the books, sort of brushing up on my shark biology and such, and all the different species. And I'm always learning new things. You know, just a lot about the biology and reproduction and their movements, sizes, their feeding habits, and then whenever we're actually out on the water, the things that we see and experience. Well, one thing, a lot of people think a shark in the water, food in the water, shark eats food. That term eating machine that was coined in Jaws is just so far from the truth. Okay, they're discretionary feeders. Sometimes they don't eat. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they're very aggressive. But for the most part, they're very discretionary. And so that's why so much everybody wants to ask, well, you know, what about the beach? What about, you know, when I get in the water, what's the chances?
That was my next question.
Very, very
minuscule?
Small. The sharks, they're out there right now. There's sharks behind us. I guarantee within half a mile swimming around right now. And it's always been that way. Hopefully it'll always stay that way.
My last question, and I don't have much time, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you had said you'd very rarely to never catch a shark in the same spot twice. Why is that?
Well, for the most part, they're usually on the move. We might have a spot where we catch the same type of shark day after day, but not the same ones. Now, there's certain places around the world where you do have local populations with certain species that always stay in the local area, and you might encounter that. But out here, they're usually on the move.
All right, Captain Sampson, it's fascinating. We wish you the best of luck this season coming up, and thank you for taking time. We know it's a busy weekend.
Coming to Ocean City.
Appreciate it. All right, coming up, making new memories at the beach that will, of course, last a lifetime.
Are you ready for the summer? Are you ready for the sunshine? Are you ready for the pleasant beach? The apple trees and a whole lot of fun.
every grave of a fallen soldier is a story of the grief that came to a wife, a mother, a child, a family, or a town. Words can only go so far in capturing the grief and sense of loss for the families of those who died in all our wars. We think of them with lasting gratitude. We miss them with lasting love.
That was President George W. Bush, the cemetery in Normandy, talking about the families of those who made the ultimate sacrifice. And we will continue to honor those brave men and women all weekend long. Tomorrow, for America's News headquarters at 1 p.m. Eastern, we're going to be live from Arlington National Cemetery, where so many people who have served our country have been laid to rest. And certainly this weekend is special for their families. So many of them will come to Arlington to visit their loved ones. 1 p.m. Eastern tomorrow. Throughout the weekend, we encourage you to share your feelings on this Memorial Day weekend, both the celebrations and the remembrances, using the hashtag ProudAmerican or on Instagram at ProudAmerican as we watch the flags there at Arlington. And also, we thank our veterans, those who both served and came home, and certainly those who did not, Liz, that we can enjoy such a spectacular summer weekend here. And it's certainly spectacular where you are out on the Maryland shore as folks are having a great time.
Yeah, that's right. I can't wait to see you out there tomorrow, Leland. Such a solemn and special time of remembrance. For our viewers at home, of course, thank you again for joining us this Memorial Day weekend. Like you said, we want to thank those who protect us day in and day out. We've obviously truly enjoyed our time here in Ocean City. We want to leave you with this, just a few kids who are very excited about this holiday weekend. Take a look.
What are you most looking forward to about the beach this weekend?
Probably going to the pool.
Going to the pool? You like the beach?
Yeah, but it's sandy.
It's sandy, that's true.
I'm coming here.
Are you going to ride any of the rides?
No.
I was trying to talk her into riding the tidal wave, but I think somebody still needs another year or two to get used to it, to get those guts up.
And of course, Leland, when you look at these kids, and of course, being a mother, and for all the young people in our lives, we wouldn't be able to enjoy them if it weren't for those men and women who keep us safe, and for those who have given the ultimate sacrifice. And on that note, thank you all for joining us. We'll be back with more news tomorrow at 1 p.m.
President Trump heading back to the White House after 9 busy days overseas. The president departing from a U.S. air base in Sicily earlier this afternoon, touting his trip as a, quote, home run. Hello, everyone. Happy Saturday to you. Welcome to a brand new hour inside America's News headquarters.
And I'm Laura Ingle. President Trump wrapping up his tour with a strong message to U.S. troops. Mr. Trump telling service members stationed at the airbase in Sicily that he will never back down from the fight against global terrorism. Amy Kellogg, live for us now in Italy. All right, Amy, how did the trip go on the ground?
Hi, Laura. Well, according to President Trump, as you mentioned, it was a home run. Not only that, but one of his senior advisors was saying that this reaffirmed America's global leadership abroad. They talked about all of these deals, $500 billion in deals signed in Saudi Arabia, then about a more firm and unified stance against terrorism that was agreed among people. Trump's advisors said that the meetings went well. They were warm. They were cordial. But it kind of depends who you speak to, because some here in Europe were talking about the G7 really being a G6+1, with that one being President Trump, as many of his ideas do diverge from some of the Europeans. However, France's newly elected centrist president, Emmanuel Macron, said that he praised Trump's capacity to listen and progress with the rest of the group. Trump, speaking to and thanking troops at the Sigonella Naval Air Station, claims that his tough talk earlier in the week on NATO members is paying off, though none of us are privy to the particular details of that particular home run.
Money is actually starting to pour into NATO from countries that would not have been doing what they're doing now had I not been elected. I can tell you that. Money is starting to pour in. It's only fair to the United States. We want to be treated fairly. And we're behind NATO all the way, but we want to be treated fairly.
What he's talking about, Laura, is simply that the other NATO members contribute 2% of their total budgets to their militaries. That is really the regulation, and apparently just 5 of NATO members to date are doing that. Laura.
Amy, you know, we've been hearing a lot about the Paris Climate Agreement. So where do the G7 leaders stand on that right now?
Well, yeah, when you talk about, or when I talked about this G6+1, in the final communique, President Trump did not sign on with the rest of the G7 members about supporting those 2015 Paris Accords that President Obama signed on to. Those set limits on emissions and sort of guidelines for segueing into economies of clean energies. Trump said that he needs to go back home and give it just a little more thought, because, of course, the White House is really split about what to do. Trump's biggest concern, Laura, is that stringent limits on emissions will cost Americans jobs. So he just needs to try to figure out what the right thing to do is. So there was a bit of division there. Chancellor Merkel said it was kind of unsatisfactory. But next week we will see what President Trump decides. And finally, Laura, I would like to point out so much has been made about this extraordinary backdrop that you've been seeing these last few days in Sicily, in Taormina. But this really was chosen not so much for its beauty, but it was chosen by the Italians to highlight the issue of migration, because 1,500 migrants and refugees have drowned this year alone in these seas, trying to make it to Europe, make it to Italy. And Italy has really borne, to a large extent, the brunt of this, taking an expected 200,000 refugees this year. So Italy really wanted to say, look, help us with these refugees and help these refugees. And that issue maybe got a bit shrift-shifted in these days because of so many other concerns, including terrorism, the leaders were discussing.
Great explanation. Thank you so much, Amy Kellogg, for us live in Italy. A very interesting time, a very important trip. Thank you so much for all of that. Great.
You know, we've been gone for now a long time, everywhere I go, but we have been gone for close to 9 days. This will be 9 days, and I think we hit a home run no matter where we are.
President Trump calling his first overseas trips since taking office a success. How do you do? Joining me now is Kelly Jane Torrance, Deputy Managing Editor for the Weekly Standard. Great to see you. You know, the thing a lot of people are talking about is President Trump scolding NATO members for not paying their fair share. Do you think he was right to call them out? I mean, after all, why should American taxpayers bear an excessive financial burden for a defense that, in many ways, benefits European countries more than the U.S.?
He does have a point here, but, you know, first of all, it's important to realize that the 2% guideline, that is a guideline. It's actually not a strict regulation. NATO says that members should do this. That's the guideline, but they don't have to. And, you know, Iceland, for example, they only spend 0.1% of their GDP on defense. They don't even have their own army. So it's going to take a while for them to even try to get close to that 2%. But it's important to also note that that is 2% of their budget. Their GDP is to be spent on defense for themselves. And that is partly because that you need to have a strong, they need to have a strong defense so that if Article 5 is invoked, which states that if one NATO member is attacked, it's considered an attack by all, and all will pitch in to help, that they have a strong enough military to do that pitching in
Yeah.
to help. So I think a wider context is a little important here in
Sure.
talking about that.
Okay. Speaking of scolding, the president also scolded Germany for its trade imbalance with the U.S. And will his tough talk, do you think, pay some dividends in the form of maybe better trade deals and adjusting trade tariffs?
You know, it's possible, but it seems like Europe is also doing a little bit of talking to Trump and trying to get him to go their way. I mean, of course, this is going to be a negotiation, and that's how Trump approached it. But it seems that's also how NATO members, the other NATO members, approached it. And they actually, you know, for example, in the G7, they got Trump to sign something that agreed that protectionism
There was a bit of
wrong. And of course,
right. There was a bit of a carrot and stick approach to the president's negotiating style. The Wall Street Journal put it this way, and I'll read it up on the screen. In Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the West Bank, Mr. Trump took a conciliatory approach. He studied avoided raising issues such as human rights that might have upset his hosts. But in Belgium and Italy, for gatherings with European leaders, Mr. Trump took a harsher tone, excoriated European leaders on defense policies, trade, and immigration. And then he withheld public comment from Europe's security that he knew his hosts wanted to hear. In other words, the infamous Article 5, if any one country is attacked, we'll all come to that defense. What do you make of that?
you know, I think they're right in saying that Trump seemed to take two approaches. Which would actually be perfectly fine if that was the way to get good deals made. You know, he's a negotiator. If it took different styles to make different deals with different people, great. But I don't think that worked here. And I think that, you know, it's very striking when the president goes to Saudi Arabia, gets this huge red carpet welcome, met at the airport, which of course President Obama was not. And this is a country in which women cannot drive. There are human rights abuses. And, you know, he reminded you know, the NATO of that. When he gave his speech at NATO, he noted, he said, hey, I just met with all these Middle Eastern leaders and they agreed to stop funding extremism and terrorism. terrorism.
Sure.
Now, I don't know if that's actually going to happen, but he's right that that is something important. And even if they're paying lip service and doing a little bit, that's better than nothing. And he was careful to remind them of that at NATO. And, you know, he mentioned, it's funny because in his speech at NATO, of course, he mentioned Article 5. The only time Article 5 has been invoked so far was after 9/11. And he was, you know, NATO kind of, I think, did a clever thing in opening a memorial to that they had a piece of the North Tower. Sort of, they're trying to get Trump to celebrate Article 5 and do it. And he mentioned in the speech, and he, you know, appreciated everyone for support, but he never came out.
To get his endorsement on Article 5, I think. Got to leave it at that. Kelly Jane Torrance of the Weekly Standard. Good to see you. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thanks.
And British police making 2 more arrests today in connection with this week's deadly Manchester bombing that killed at least 22 people. That brings the total number of people in custody to 11. The arrests come as the UK lowers its terror threat level, but authorities urge citizens to remain vigilant. Rick Leventhal live from Manchester with more on this. Rick, this continues to be an evolving situation.
Absolutely, Laura. And authorities say they're still concerned that the suspected bomber may have built one more or more devices, and that's why, even though they did reduce the terror threat level from severe to critical to severe, they are asking the public to remain vigilant and be on high alert throughout this 3-day bank holiday weekend. And of course, Manchester police have been carrying on a very aggressive investigation, raiding at another location this morning using a controlled explosive to gain entry to a home. As you mentioned, 2 more arrests today. 14 locations are still being searched by police. The chief constable saying we have made significant progress in this fast-moving and complex investigation, working with the National Counterterrorism Policing Network and UK intelligence partners, and securing the arrests of 11 people who remain in custody. The level of resources we have available to us remains the same as we continue to take positive action, so you will notice additional officers, including armed officers, on patrol, especially at a number of events this week, to ensure the security and safety of everyone. But it's important that people remain alert and vigilant. Authorities say that extra security will be posted at some 1,300 events over the weekend, including the Football Association Cup final, the rugby final, and concerts and other outdoor events. A lot of that security on display at Wembley Stadium in London today. You know, we've talked a lot about the young victims of this attack, but parents were killed too, including 2 mothers who were waiting for their children to leave that Ariana Grande concert. They released some balloons here at this memorial at St. Anne's Square in honor of those 2 mothers. One of the daughters talked about her loss.
For 18 hours, we was wondering where they were, looking for them, going around hospitals, showing pictures. I had friends of mine offering to do it. We had a whole search party out there, and all along they was in the building.
So the mourning continues here, and so does the investigation, Laura, and this country does remain on high alert. Third.
All right, Rick Leventhal for us on the ground there in Manchester. Thank you so much.
ISIS now claiming responsibility for a deadly attack on Coptic Christians in Egypt. Gunmen targeting a bus carrying Christians yesterday, killing at least 29 people. The victims were on their way to a monastery south of Cairo. Kitty Logan is in London with the very latest. Hi, Kitty.
Hi, Greg. Well, there has been widespread condemnation of this attack. President Trump described it as a merciless slaughter. Now, these militants fired on a bus carrying those Coptic Christians as they travelled through the desert. To a monastery south of Cairo. Witnesses describe 8 to 10 attackers dressed in military uniforms and wearing masks. We now know they were ISIS fighters. These gunmen reportedly fired at close range at the windows of the bus before getting on board. They shot men on their first.
Delays in congested airports. The airline says it is experiencing a major IT failure and that there is no evidence of a cyber attack. Everything from check-in lines to the company's mobile app and call centers all being affected. British Airways hopes to begin restoring services on Sunday. What a mess.
Well, a pair of Good Samaritans trying to help two women on a commuter train pay for it with their lives when another passenger suddenly goes on a vicious stabbing spree. We'll have a live report just ahead. And Senate Republicans preparing for a big showdown over a controversial provision in their bill to repeal and replace Obamacare.
We need to bring down the cost of coverage, and we need to revitalize the market so that people have real choices and real access to affordable.
The House Budget Committee, Education and Workforce Committee as well. Welcome to you, sir. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, Laura.
Hello. All right. So let's get right to it. One of the biggest concerns for the public and challenges for lawmakers is how to break down and handle these pre-existing conditions. There are many Americans who are very worried right now about how their premiums will go up, especially now that the CBO has released its report saying they, in fact, have reason to worry. You've just put out an article on TwinCities.com. I was reading through it earlier, outlining a list of what you see about the myths, you say, about the AHCA. So what are some of those? Tell us about them.
Well, this is the week that HHS put out a report that said under Obamacare from 2013 to last year, premiums more than doubled. They went up 105%. Under the Affordable Care Act, Laura, we priced everyone as though they were sick. Everybody had to buy on the government exchanges the most expensive plan possible. What happened was young and healthy people couldn't afford it. They dropped out of the insurance pools, and the insurance industry has a death spiral. Aetna and Humana say we're out of the Obamacare exchanges next year. So nobody's there to subsidize anybody else. By allowing the industry to price a policy that fits me best, a young and healthy person best, you get more young and healthy people back in the insurance pools to subsidize the sick. That's the only way to get this plan to work. That's the only way insurance can work.
You've been in this for quite a while. I'm curious, so what did you make of the CBO score overall? You had a chance to look at the report.
Well, sure. First thing you have to understand is this is the same outfit, the CBO, and they work hard, but they said that the Affordable Care Act would cover 26 million people by this year. It's actually 10 million people. They've overestimated the ACA and underestimated us. But I will say this, in the report, they say premiums will be lower 4% to 30%. In states that apply for waivers so they can price the product that suits the customer, those premiums could drop up to 30% in this report. The report also says the deficit will go down by $120 billion. So contrary to the spin by the opponents, and remember, one thing everybody ought to remember, the very same people who are criticizing healthcare reform now are the very same folks that told us Obamacare would work. In Minnesota, premiums have gone up 55%, 60%. The state had to bail out the exchange here. You've got insurance companies dropping 100,000 people off their plans. This current system is untenable. So we've got to have real health care reform, and that's what we're doing.
You know, Mr. Lewis, with the ongoing fight over pre-existing coverage, a lot of Americans watching this, listening now, wonder how is all of this going to affect any of the real chances of getting a health care bill done? How do you see it?
Well, first of all, the American Health Care Act bans any denial of pre-existing conditions. That's a canard that's been out there for some time. It bans denial of coverage for pre-existing conditions. All it says is the industry can suit a plan that's best suited to the customer. And that means young and healthy people will have lower premiums, and they'll get back in market, as I say. So without the undoing of these price controls and allowing the market to function, you can't price everybody as though they're sick. We've seen what happens. If you really want to cover the sickest Americans, allow the prices to fluctuate so we get young, healthy people back in the insurance pools to subsidize the older and the sick.
And real quick before I let you go, how do you help people understand how the waivers work and how it could affect their families? A lot of people are trying to wrap their head around this.
Yeah.
And know how it's going to affect their children, their spouses. How do you explain the waiver part of this?
That's a great question. All the waivers do is allow the industry, as I say, to pool risk and price risk. But understand, no one can be charged a penny more unless they stop paying their premiums. All right. No one can be charged a dime more than anybody else unless they stop paying their premiums. And by the way, that is the same policy that was in Kennedy-Kassenbaum in HIPAA in 1996.
And I wonder, has this been frustrating for you? How frustrating has it been, if it has been?
Yeah, the misinformation is very, very frustrating. This is real healthcare reform. And what's especially frustrating, Laura, is right now, no one has a clue what we're going to do if we don't reform healthcare. All of the critics have no plans. They're looking at this debacle in healthcare right now. It is our responsibility and the responsibility of people who are serious about governing to reform healthcare in a meaningful way, and that's what we're doing.
All right, Mr. Lewis, thank you so much for your time. We got to leave it right there. Always great to have you on the program.
My pleasure.
All right, Greg.
Well, the president heading home right now after his 9-day trip overseas, waiting for him fresh concerns about his campaign's alleged ties to Russia. Our legal panel is here to weigh in on that. And a train ride in Oregon turns deadly. How 2 passengers sacrificed their lives to stop an apparent...
Police in Oregon identifying the man accused of fatally stabbing 2 people and injuring a 3rd on a commuter train. Portland police say that Jeremy Joseph Christian attacked the passengers when they tried to stop him from yelling racial slurs at 2 Muslim women on the train. Witnesses say Christian was spewing hate speech and ranting against a number of religions and ethnicities before the attack. Will Carr, live in our West Coast newsroom with those details. Will, what a terrible story.
Laura, and the victims didn't even know the suspect. They only stepped in to defend the two Muslim women and to try to calm the man down. Confrontation broke out Friday afternoon on a Portland train. Authorities say 35-year-old Jeremy Joseph Christian was hurling hate-filled slurs at two Muslim women, one of whom was wearing a hijab. That's when the Good Samaritan stepped in to de-escalate the situation, but Christian allegedly pulled out a knife and attacked. One victim was pronounced dead on the scene. Another died at the hospital. A third was stabbed, but is expected to survive. Take a listen to one witness describe the chaos.
I was scared.
Say what?
I was so scared, you know, and so I knocked on the door at the driver to let him know. We are calling for help for the 911. So we called 911. Almost everybody called 911.
Authorities said that Christian fled on foot. They caught up to him a short time later, and he was engaging in a verbal confrontation with the officers that was caught on camera. Christian was taken into custody without further incident. He's now charged with a number of crimes, including aggravated murder, attempted murder, intimidation in the second degree, a felon in possession of a restricted weapon. He's being held without bail as investigators continue to question him as to what led up to the attack. He's set to appear in court first thing on Monday. Laura.
Good Samaritans just trying to do the right thing with it for their lives. All right, Will Carr, thank you so much for that report. Greg.
As President Trump makes his way back to Washington, new questions swirling about the Trump campaign and alleged ties to Russia. There's a new report by the Washington Post claiming senior aide and son-in-law to the president, Jared Kushner, discussed a secret back channel of communication with the Kremlin. That conversation reportedly took place with a Russian ambassador at Trump Tower last year. Let's bring in David Bruno and Keisha Heaven. Both are defense attorneys and former prosecutors. Can we all agree it's not a crime to talk to a Russian, nor is it a crime to initiate secure communications with a foreign government, including the Russians? Keisha?
While it's not a crime, I agree, Greg. The issue that I see is that why would he propose that it be back channeled and that it take place in
done all the time?
But it in the climate of what they're already being accused of helping.
But
Trump
it happened in December, apparently, before the administration took office, so there wasn't that climate.
Right, but I think that goes to the point of suspicions that people have. So I feel like this needs to be investigated. We don't know enough to say it's a crime, but it needs to be investigated.
He might have wanted better cooperation in the war against terrorists in Syria and get the aid and assistance of the Russians.
I'm just not buying that.
All right, David. Back-channel communications are not uncommon, as I mentioned. In fact, many past presidents have done it, notably John F. Kennedy. In fact, it was a back-channel secret communication that diffused the Soviet American Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, no question. And actually, National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster said a statement today that this wasn't out of the ordinary, and that's done. But if I can, on the timeline of this, because it is actually important that this happened in December, because this was the transition period. Right. And in fact, Jared Kushner was designated the point of contact for foreign officials that wanted to get in touch with the president-elect. Right. That was within his responsibility. So the fact that he had any communications with the ambassador or any Russian officials is not a problem whatsoever.
All right. But let's flip to something else that has been controversial this week. The law governing the special counsel says he can only investigate crimes, limited jurisdiction, crimes only. Wrongdoing, sorry, crimes only. And when you look at the order appointing him special counsel, it says, quote, investigate any links or coordination between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. That's not a crime. There is no such crime as collusion in a political campaign, only an antitrust law for things like price fixing.
Well, due to the fact that there's already an investigation about the Russians helping President Trump win his presidency, they have investigated, because if it wasn't for that investigation, this would not have come out.
Let's say there was extensive collaboration between the Trump campaign and the Russians. Show me a statute.
But there may be espionage. We don't know that.
Espionage?
So, yes, because why does
Conveying
Kushner,
military secrets and national security secrets. They didn't even have it back then.
But we don't know what those conversations entail. We don't know why he needed these conversations to be so secretive, and it just doesn't sit well with me, and it doesn't sit well with a lot of citizens.
Is there anybody in Washington who hasn't had a sit-down conversation with Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador? For goodness sakes, that's his job, isn't it?
Apparently not. Okay, but here's the point in my response to you. First of all, these investigations are secret investigations, and they should be. It's one of the big concerns that the president has, and these are these leaks. You know, so
those are the crimes.
Yeah, a lot of what we're hearing and the information that we have to use in this analysis are from leaks. So the fact of the matter is we do not know what the FBI has found in their investigation. We do not know what the Deputy Attorney General has on his desk, and for the reason. So yes, that order may be a little vague, and to your point, we don't know what's in the investigation itself.
The special counsel order also allows Robert Mueller to investigate, quote unquote, any other matters. It's the all-encompassing phrase that basically allows a special counsel to run rampant in limitless directions, which may mean that this will morph into the Trump-Comey conversation and all these allegations of obstruction of justice. If the president says to the FBI director, gee, I hope you can clear Michael Flynn because he's a good guy, it doesn't amount to obstruction of justice, a specific intent crime. Does it?
No, it doesn't, but we have to have that separation of powers. There has to be checks and balances. I understand the president has power, but the FBI director needs to act independently as well, because if a crime has taken place, you can't just go by the direction of the president to say, okay, well, I'm going to leave this alone.
Doesn't the president have the constitutional authority not only to hire and fire the FBI director, but to tell him what to investigate and what not to investigate?
It certainly has that authority to have communications, especially if the president himself is not a target. And that's maybe the reason we saw in the letter to Director Comey that you have told me on 3 occasions that I was not a target.
And now you're fired.
Yes, because it's relevant, I guess, because if he's not a target, then it's a communication with the director of the FBI. And I guarantee every other president has had communications with the director on these points.
JFK and LBJ were forever telling J. Edgar Hoover to do this investigation and stop that investigation. It goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson and the trial of Aaron Burr. All right, thank you. Now I'm getting in the weeds, aren't I? Wow. I don't know where that popped out. David Bruno, Keisha, having great to see you guys.
Thank you, Greg.
Pleasure always.
Thank you.
All right, President Bush teaming up with an old friend to protect their common legacy. The fight that's uniting a rock star and a former president. Coming up next. And Hillary Clinton takes aim at President Trump during a commencement speech more than 6 months after she lost the election. So here's the question. Is it time to let it go? A fair and balanced debate coming up.
June 4th, get ready.